Hello, everybody. Once again, it's the Williamsville Podcast, and we are focusing on ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunction.
Yeah. And we've been talking in the last several series of episodes about the laundry list traits. We've said this a lot of times throughout this podcast, but we'll probably be referencing some of those things throughout the talk today. So if you haven't heard those or you're interested to hear more about what is Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunction, what is the laundry list, go back and listen to those episodes. But today I wanted to kind of flip the script a little bit because I know in the last several podcasts, we kind of did this where, we would talk about each trait, you'd share about, your experience with it. I would kind of talk through examples of how this could look. But I was thinking I wanted to kind of hear more about like your personal experience with ACA stuff because we had a little bit of that, I know, in the other podcasts. But I wanted to kind of start off by just because I don't think I've actually asked you this before. Like, how did you first hear about ACA and how did it get involved with you where you were in your recovery journey?
Okay, so I believe this happened around year 6 of my recovery. So I got into the 12-step program through Gamblers Anonymous. Did some Alcoholics Anonymous as well, but primarily where I worked the steps and all that was Gamblers Anonymous. And as it's interesting when you start learning about yourself, it makes you very curious, especially like for me, once I got past year 1 or 2 where so much of what you learn is like just painful, right? Not to say that you weren't feeling the pain and active addiction and knowing some of these things you grew up with or whatever, like you felt it, but then working through some of it is even harder. And there is a tendency, I know for me, there was a tendency to want to avoid it, not deal with some of the stuff. But I also would hear in the suggestions that if you don't address these things, your addiction could potentially come back.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know what happened in year 6 but I was still, the more I would learn, the more excited I got about learning about what really happened. I became curious about different things with some of these memories. Like, I learned that, I could have a memory of my past that didn't have to bring me back to all of the feelings that I had back then. I learned to be able to look at it as if, it's just a matter of fact kind of thing, where I could address different things and learn more about them. And somewhere in there, I found the laundry list. That's where it started.
Yeah.
I was looking at some different traits because I knew that because so much of my story had to do with a father who leaves early, has some addictions, and then stepfathers who were also like out there. And alcohol was something that kept coming up in those relationships. I can remember with I think he was third father, maybe. I think he was number 3. He would, I would be in my room going to sleep, and we had a wood stove on that side of the house, and I could hear him at the wood stove at night, like talking to his dead father, He'd always be drunk and different things. And actually he's the one, eventually he and I got in a fist fight, and then I left home early and moved in with a friend and all of that. But yeah, that curiosity. And so once, and anyone that has watched some of our other podcasts or maybe even if they haven't seen them all, they have read the laundry list.
Yeah.
Once you get through a couple of them, if this is material for you.
Yeah. It clicks pretty quick.
Yeah, you don't have to go through all the traits before you know, wait a second, I might want to look more at this. And that's what I did. So
Sure.
And the more I learned, the more things made sense.
Yeah. So did you, because I imagine, 6 years into recovery, you're going to GA meetings a lot. You were working with your sponsor.
I was.
Yeah. So, I mean, I imagine that, a lot of his memories and childhood stuff probably gets brought up, in the course of meeting.
In the fourth step, yeah.
Fourth step is at work. And then you stumble across the laundry list or reading it and are like, oh, yeah, this stuff connects. So where'd you go with it from there? Were you looking more into literature? Did you bring it to sponsor? Did you go to meetings?
No, I would bring some stuff in meetings, but what I did do would kind of put a spotlight on it. And I still do this today, even with all my years. Things that kind of circle back through. My rule is this is something that I need to put in a fourth step.
Okay.
That somewhere along the line, I missed this specific thing. You've heard me work with others here. I'm not a fan for like the overly generalized, oh, my dad was always mean to me kind of stuff. I want all the specific things because I know for myself, if I don't deal with all those specific events, I still end up having some of that stuff come back up.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. So the laundry list stuff started helping you bring stuff back up to work through in fourth step.
Oh, yeah.
Did you, at any point, did you start attending an ACA meeting here and there?
Online.
You did some.
I never did really get in with an ACA, which, I'm not opposed to doing. I mean, I would still do it today. I have still done online ACA meetings.
Yeah.
Because I like, well, first, there are a few dynamics with it. One is, and I think this is true for anybody that gets used to a 12-step program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I know everything there is to know about Gamblers Anonymous, right? And you get used to that. And especially if you're going through a period of time where maybe there aren't many new members coming in or something, having that other program out there that is also helpful to you. And I would say in addition to, I'm not saying, I'm not going to go to my GA meeting and I'm just going to do this now.
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh, it's me. I think it's very helpful with the momentum and also keeping you fresh with what you're learning.
Yeah, it's like an additional perspective that kind of like supplements the existing stuff.
Which is why it kept filling in some blanks with the fourth step stuff.
Yeah.
Because they specifically talk about some things, many of which did happen when I was growing up.
Sure. Yeah, and with the online meetings, I mean, I know that folks that we've worked with here who do choose to go, take a look at some ACA meetings, usually for the most part, I think maybe barring a couple exceptions, I've do online meetings. I think that's just due to availability in it, where people live. I actually don't know of any in-person ones in our area. There may be a couple, but they're not easily findable at least online.
Yeah, so you kind of have like your main meetings. You've got Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. I might even put Gamblers Anonymous in between in terms of what I'm going to call a niche meeting, which would be like an ACA.
Yeah.
Sometimes, depending on the area, OA, Overeaters Anonymous, might be in like an Alcoholics Anonymous. But they are also often, over here on the side. But the big three, you're usually able to find a meeting wherever you're at. And then some of these other places, that's the beauty of the online stuff now is, there was a time, maybe you can't even go to a CODA meeting or you can't go to adult children of alcoholics. You just can't. They're not around.
Yeah.
Whereas the online brings it in for everyone.
Yeah, there's options there. Yeah, so coming back to the traits, that's why I said it. I started reading it and pretty quickly I was like, oh yeah, this connects. I think that mirrors a lot of times what we see in the groups when we run the groups and we bring in the laundry list. Sometimes people will read a trait and they'll have that kind of look on their face like, oh my gosh. A lot of times I find that it brings a smile or a sense of humor. Pretty quickly they're like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. And that connects pretty quickly. So, even without necessarily, we don't have to get into the specific traits, but what were some of the things that you feel like you started to get from the ACA laundry list that you were recognizing as like patterns in your behavior?
Well, the walking on eggshells, the fear of authority figures, fear of conflict, all of that stuff, which I knew some of it, but there's something in the reframing that, like you said, different perspective that I don't know. It just stimulated me in a different way. Like another thing that happens too. And this is something I didn't even learn in ACA. It seemed to have happened to me in all of the processing on the step work, where I started thinking to myself, going back, I wonder, how can I address what I, at the time I called little Billy? How do we talk to little Billy? And then I would just start imagining that. I'd be like, okay, so here we go. People are throwing stuff across the room, or people are yelling or whatever. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to talk to little Billy, just let him know that everything's going to be okay. And it's a thing. So that was kind of something through my processing I started doing.
Yeah.
And then, when you start reading the literature of ACA, they start using those two words, inner child.
Yeah.
Which is what I was doing.
Yeah. Exactly what you were doing. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so I was like, yeah, I can relate to that. It makes sense to me.
That's really interesting. And that framing, when you started going through that this was just something that you like came up with yourself
through the step work. Well, like a lot of us as many younger, what would I say to myself if this is going on?
Yeah.
But again, like I do think it's important and no way am I trying to say I'm special or any of that. I'm not. But for whatever reason, my motivation for self-discovery was through the roof when I got into the program.
Yeah, I was there.
Because I, and the first couple of years, probably not. I mean, the first few years, it was all about, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And then as I worked the steps and you start to learn these things, you go, oh, that's interesting. And then it became this, I don't know, it gave me life, actually, because it wasn't about, let's find something to blame it on. Let's just look at why this happened and how can we fix it. And you've seen me in other groups where and then I break out the whole idea of the timeline and these parents that you had resentments with. How old were they when this happened to you or whatever? And you, a lot of times you find, my dad was a 23-year-old goofball when he was being dumber than hell or whatever it is,
Yeah. Yeah. That life, I mean, I know that we're pretty big on, I think both of us, on the self-discovery piece. But yeah, it's like I don't think that we could put a timeline on it, but I think that's when you talk about like working this 6 years in, it kind of added wind to the sails a little bit. I think that's one of the really cool parts about recovery. And you different people relate to this, I think, in different ways. But whenever I talk with people, it's like they'll talk about different phases of it and different things that were relevant for them, different things they learned. But yeah, by the time it sounds like you started the self-discovery, you were in the phase of looking at like, I just want to understand how things impacted me. And if they did, well, what do I do about that now? You're well past, and I imagine that probably is a big part of your step work. You're well past the like blame, resentment phase and more into like, yeah, but I don't think someone arrives at the, how do I talk to little Billy if you haven't done some of that other foundational work?
Plus, by then, I am quite certain that I had been going through like the second go through up the steps.
Yeah.
Which is, like you said, my first fourth step, had plenty of blame in there. But the second fourth step was deeper.
Yeah.
because I mean, you know, things were getting better, and then the other thing, like to the blame point, you have to be careful how you say that, because there are things that come up that is true. I mean, this was a bunch of crap that happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and you have to see it as such.
Sure.
And that it did impact you in some of those ways that you were using, but where the blame piece happens is when I'm in active addiction, and I take those things that happened to me and use them as a reason why I should continue in active addiction, because these people did this and that or whatever. I'll never get better. I don't give a shit. All that stuff.
Yeah.
That's where the blame is not good. But it's just more of a, again, it's a fact-finding mission. The truth of it is, you know, whether my father was 23 at the time or not or whatever, he was a jerk. And this is how he showed it. This is how it affected me. I mean, a lot of the stuff from when you're a little kid, you don't really have a part in.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think also you know, a distinction to make where it's like, yeah, I mean, because we do talk about that term blame, and it's like, yeah, we're not saying, oh, you should never use the word blame, because yeah, there are things that like especially happen to kids, and like it's not the kid's fault. It is the adult's responsibility. Yeah, that is right. But yeah, you're that's a good way of putting it. It's like when we talk about the blame, it's like when we use those things, particularly in adulthood, as like the justification to do things that might even be kind of unrelated.
Yeah. And a lot of times, by the time I was working that, when I say 6 years in, at that point I'm 36.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at 30 years old, getting into recovery, I can't keep doing that. I can't keep saying, blame, and that's the end.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah. That can't be the end.
Yeah, that can't be the end, or else, because otherwise I'm gonna be stuck. I'm gonna still be doing that while I'm 50 and 60. That basically whatever happened to me is going to be all that ever happens to me.
Yeah,
because I stay living.
Yeah, that word stuck comes up. There's I wish I could remember who, but one of the like grandfathers of therapy, or sort of one of the like adages with it, is people go to therapy traditionally when they feel stuck, when they feel stuck with something in their life. And yeah, I do think that stuckness, it can come up when people are stuck in their cycles. So I'm curious, so then when you think about the specific traits, so what I'm getting so far is like you kind of use the ACA work, the stuff in the groups and the laundry list, that helped you with self-discovery, and you took that back into, further your step work and your recovery work. Did you ever think specifically about like, okay, these are the traits that I'm feeling like I relate to. How do I work on that? Or is this something like, I'm going to just keep doing the recovery process and they're going to get better through that?
Which that is how the things usually work for me, is yes, I keep doing the process and it gets better through that.
Yeah.
Like today, where I could say that the ACA, and I have to be careful that I don't take it too far. Okay. But like, one of the things I do find myself doing with, say, the laundry list with my children, right? I'm very careful about, now granted, for the two younger ones, I was never in active addiction during their life, right? So you would hope that I'm not giving them any of these traits, but I'm very careful about how I am around them. Like I just don't want to leave them with unnecessary crap. I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want them to take on your stuff.
Yeah,
they're gonna be their own people, and they're gonna have their own experiences. And
yeah. So there are times I feel like, with that, I can get, I don't know if the word scrupulous. I guess I could get a little too scrupulous with it.
Like you get like hypersensitive to it?
Hypersensitive, yeah. Hypersensitive. I don't want to And there was a recent thing happen with it's actually with that thing I was telling you about that I didn't deal with, but I was heightened. It was a baking thing, by the way, but I was heightened by it, and they heard how frustrated I was, about the whole thing. Do I think there's anything wrong in my children knowing that I'm human? No.
Yeah.
But even in a situation like that, there are some variations of that where I could take it to a level that is not helpful to them.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that like idea of almost like the overcorrection, I think comes up sometimes for people who have children who are reading or getting into ACA stuff, where they're so scared of repeating patterns or so scared of impacting their children that you can see them go sort of too far to the other direction. So maybe like someone's so terrified of anger, it's like they suppress all of their anger because they can never be angry around their kids ever. And so then what that ends up is like, now I've created more problems because I've just got suppressed anger all the time. Comes out in other ways. And yeah, I mean, it takes a healthy dose of like perspective and self-compassion, just like parenting, I think, in general, but like trying to work through all that stuff. I think there's something that's like, I almost like want to get you to talk about it more, because I think a lot of people listening kind of need to hear, like the piece you said, like, I found that for most of my stuff, the way that it's gotten better is just, I keep working the process. Like, can you just share more about what you mean by that, or your...
Yeah. So let's say I have it in my head that, I don't know, knowing about my relationship with, let's just say an ex, is going to help my recovery, say. I don't want to put like time limits on it that, hey, I'm going to do this and that, and this is going to be the result. Because the truth of it is, with work that you're like inner work, come on, you don't know what it means. No. Until it means something. Yeah. I mean, that's how you know. So you work this process, and what results you're going to get is whatever it's going to be. I can't try to control what, we always talk about the outcome or whatever, but whatever the result is going to be from that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how some of this stuff is going to benefit me. I just know that if I am dedicated to working on various things, change will happen.
Yeah. That's one of the things that, I mean, I love about doing the groups with you, and your perspective on the recovery is like, you talk a lot about knowing that particularly early in the process, people can become very obsessed with and fixated on the idea of, I need to figure it out. Usually with the idea in mind of that, like, if I figure this out, then it's all going to get better. Or even, I think in some cases, there can be the rationalization addiction part of our brain. It's, well, once I figure this out, then I'm not going to have a problem anymore. And then maybe I can go back to, using or moderating or whatever. And that can come with a lot of pitfalls. So yeah, helping people be like, you have to counterintuitively kind of detach yourself from like this outcome of what you think that healing is going to look like, and be focusing more on just, I think, the understanding and the talking about the things that caused it in the first place. And you kind of got to just let the healing and the recovery happen. You get out of the way rather than try to make it happen.
And maybe this is a more subconscious kind of thing that happened to me. Again, going back to, one of the things that my first sponsor said. He told me, and like, I was brand new, and he said, if I were to ask you where you will be in 5 years, if all of this works out, you will sell yourself short.
Well,
and I took that to heart, so I knew what he was trying to say there. that is because there's no way I can determine today what 5 years will be like, and I'm going to base it on what I know today. And in early recovery, I would have said something like, "Oh, I'll have a nice car and I'll have a bunch of money," and I would have said all of this like pretty shallow stuff, right? When really what I ended up with at 5 years, by then I had inner peace.
Yeah.
And just like the old credit card commercial says, at the end where it says priceless, yet inner peace, priceless.
Yeah.
That's and I had the ability, even when things weren't going great, to center myself, and I didn't have to get caught up in the madness ever again if I didn't want to.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. Those words are very they're very poignant. You'll sell yourself short. I think that the managing of expectations is a hard part of the recovery process, and finding ways personally that we can just keep ourselves invested in the process is a big part of the battle. Whatever keeps you coming back or whatever keeps you doing the work. And I think for some people, maybe it is I find it interesting and engaging the self-discovery process. And then that's what keeps people coming back. Maybe it's the community. It's I care about these people that I've met and the support they bring. I mean, maybe it's just also the results that people are seeing in their lives too. But that's why I think that even though some people find it cliche, like the idea of reflecting on gratitude, I think that's an important part of the recovery process, because it's getting people to think about the things that are keeping them invested in the process, which is work.
Right. And if I'm being very honest with myself, if I start thinking I don't need it anymore and all of these things, I mean, that's pride and ego coming up, and I mean, in some cases it could be fear, if I start touching a button that feels like this, but I would like to believe that after you've done it for a while, that part of it, I know for me, something might feel uncomfortable, but I've been through that so many times that I just know, okay, something will be uncomfortable for a little bit, then I'll move on to the next thing.
Yeah. So I think, if I were thinking of listeners hearing this, that, in some ways, I always think about how unsatisfying it probably is with people they want to know, how do I do it? How do I move to the flip side of laundry list? How do I do recovery? And I imagine that it feels unsatisfying when they hear people say, well, there's not really an answer, and you have to work the process and you have to find that. But I do think it's really true. I think there are probably some things for people to take, if people really resonate with ACA language and the laundry list traits, you'll hear the ACA laundry list traits refer to life inner child work. I think often people find some real value in that work. Usually you do that with a therapist, but to be honest with you, I think a lot of 4-step work is essentially inner child work, as I have seen that and experienced it on both sides. So I think there's good stuff in both of those that people could work on. And yeah, I like what you said about how you developed this idea of well, I recognize with the walking on eggshells that I was still doing, stuff that little Billy did. And so then I have to think about as an adult then, well, what did I need back then that I didn't get? Or how can I give some of that to that fearful part of myself that's still in there? And you take some responsibility for the managing of my own healing. That I think about that as that is where a lot of the change occurs. If I'm relating to laundry list trait, I don't know, 6, and I've got an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, then every single time I feel that part of me come up where I just think, I just want to drop everything about myself and go save this person. Every time I catch that and I stop myself and I ask, where is that coming from? And I tell myself something that I need to hear that gets me to not give into that. That's recovery work, I think. It's all of those little micro moments. And people aren't going to be perfect with it.